What I'd really like to see is a fee for service model. If I want to go get a SOC 2 or another cert, I pay somebody a fee that covers the cost of processing my package. I'd really like to see GSA stand up a fee for service model where if I'm a CSP and it's going to take 6 weeks of an AO's time to do this work, that I just fund that 6 weeks fee for service. And whatever the demand is how many they end up hiring. The upsides of that is, as a CSP, I don't have to worry about finding someone to do extra work. On that side, I just pay for the work to be done, so I can get my foot in the door.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Risk Management Show podcast, where we explore critical trends and strategies shaping risk, security, and leadership today. I'm your host, Boris Agranovich, founder and CEO at Global Risk Community, and our guest, second-time guest, is Travis Howerton, co-founder and CEO at Regscale. Travis, welcome back to our Risk Management Show podcast today.
Thanks for having us, Boris. We're honored to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. So last time we discussed enhancing cloud security protocols with continuous control monitoring. And today, I believe that we will have a very thoughtful conversation on the recent changes to the FedRamp programs. But before that, Travis, could you remind us shortly about, or tell us a short story about yourself, your career path, and what you guys at Regscale up to these days?
Certainly, happy to do that. So I'm Travis Howerton, you mentioned, the co-founder and CEO at Regscale. Most of my background's in national security. So I retired as the first chief technology officer of the U.S. nuclear weapons program. Then got to go to Oak Ridge National Lab, where I ran the IT services division there for a couple of years, premier science and research institute for the United States. And then my last tour of duty was with Bechtel, where I got to be in the CIO's office helping leading digital transformation globally for Bechtel. So all my experience has been in large, highly regulated industry, which is where we sort of found the problem of Gen 1 GRCs just no longer work for the CISO today. That technology moves too fast. There's too much regulatory sprawl. And Moore's Law and all these ephemeral technologies make traditional ways of doing things with manual means very difficult. And at Regscale, we are a AI cybersecurity platform, Gen 2 Cyber GRC, that's really looking to operationalize risk management for the CISO using compliance as code, automation, and AI. And so that's a little bit about me and Regscale.
All right. So it's a great career path. So let's go to our topic and introduce this FedRamp program. This pilot program, FedRamp 20X pilot program, is being hailed as a significant leap forward. And from your perspective, what are the most impactful aspects of this program for both cloud service providers, CSPs, and federal agencies, and why is it considered such a major step?
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple key aspects of it from my perspective. One is I really appreciate they're taking more of a commercial service-oriented mindset of how do we get people through the process in the most efficient means. So very excited about that. They've reduced some redundant review steps. And really focused on how do we get the latest technology and innovation from the private sector in the hands of their government customers, who are often significantly lagging their commercial peers because of how long it takes to get through these types of processes. So I think fundamentally they're trying to close that gap. And so I think everybody would applaud any effort that gets better technology in the hands of the government. At the same time, I really like that they're focused on real-world security. So if you think of traditional FISMA, ATO, FedRamp processes, you think mountains of paperwork that take forever to create, to read, to audit. Some of that still exists and will, but what they're really focused on are sort of these key security indicators and practical real-world impact of how secure is your technology. Because while we want to go fast, what I always say is at the same time, cyberspace has never been more dangerous than it is today. The world is dangerous. Our adversaries grow in sophistication every day. AI tools make cyberspace more dangerous and take people who maybe were low skilled and upskill them. And so I think at the same time you want to go faster, you don't want to lower the bar. And so I think they are on that knife's edge. How do they try to do both? How do we go faster, get better technology in, but also raise the bar in security at the same time? And so I think it's a delicate balancing act that they are working on, and I applaud both sides of that initiative.
Fantastic. So let's discuss about streamlining the authorization journey. How specifically does this program, FedRamp, aim to streamline the authorization process, and what are the key differences compared to the traditional approaches, and what are the anticipated impacts on organizations that are already authorized, that's currently in progress, or those just beginning to consider FedRamp certification?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two sides to it. There's the people who are trying to get their FedRAMP, and then there's the people who already have their FedRAMP. And so for the people trying to get their FedRAMP, I'd say the big thing they're doing is trying to put in place basically an express lane for low. Right now, they're not focused as much on the moderate and high systems, but at least for the low systems, can they lower the barriers to entry and get those things through faster so companies can get their foot in the door? So I think there's a fair amount of stuff they're talking about doing there. There's also some stuff that I'd say is not well defined yet, but they've got working groups working on it. Where can they use reciprocity at low? Maybe you could use a CSA star. What is a SOC 2 by me? Or if I have ISO 27000, all those sorts of questions of where can they reuse and accelerate things, at least at the lower tiers to pull things through. So I think that's part of the people who need to get in. So like, is there a fast lane for the lower risk systems to pull them through? And I think starting in the lower risk area makes a ton of sense to me. The second part is, all right, I'm already FedRAMP. So like Regscale just got our FedRAMP high approval through DHS. It's with the PMO. Then you enter into continuous monitoring. The burden of continuous monitoring is fairly high in terms of the artifacts you have to submit. There's sort of two things that I think are helpful that they've done already. One is move from ambiguous deliverables that create massive spreadsheets and other things to try to get machine readable, well-defined key security indicators or KSIs. I think what that opens up for companies like us is the ability to automate all that stuff and really reduce the operational burden on us to do continuous monitoring and provide that data to the government. The government needs that data to continue to authorize the system, to ensure you're in a low risk posture. But how do we provide it to them in the simplest way that has the least drag on our business? I think is an admirable goal. The other thing they just did recently is they moved from significant change request process, SCR, to significant change notice, SCN. What that means is now, as a cloud service provider, if I add new products, features, services, I can onboard them faster for the government. So it's more a let them know that I did it and I followed the process versus get an approval. That should allow basically the cloud service providers to give basically commercial solutions to the government much faster so that there's not this big time delay between, let's say, Microsoft Azure offering a commercial service and then it's showing up on the Gov Cloud side 2 years later, right? So I think that's going to compress that window significantly, which is a win for the government and the mission owners. So lots of good things happening in that space.
All right. So let's discuss a little bit the automation imperative. Can you elaborate on the critical importance of automating the FedRAMP process in meeting these demands? How does automation contribute to a more robust and responsive security posture for federal cloud deployments?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple aspects to that. When we think of that on the Regscale side, we sort of think of it in three buckets. There's compliance as code, There's then sort of the automation ecosystem, and then there's an AI overlay as well. And all three of those things together can fundamentally transform the way you think about getting and maintaining your FedRamp or any authorization process for that matter. And so it sort of starts with a compliance as code foundation. There's a bunch of things going there. So I'm privileged to serve on the OSCAL Foundation board. That's the Open Security Controls Assessment Language. NIST did a lot of work there. The FedRAMP PMO has done a lot of work there in the past, but think of that as a policy as code way of both publishing what the requirements are in machine readable formats and then being able to do assessments in machine readable formats. Gives you a standards based foundation. Also, there's a lot of big push in software bill of materials coming out of the supply chain breaches. So being able to publish SBOMs and be able to see the ingredients that make up your software list and know what's in the can. So very similar to the grocery store analogy. You have to print the ingredients on the back. So as a consumer, I know what I'm putting in my body. Very similar thing for cyber. If I'm using a bunch of third-party or open source libraries, disclosing that so you know exactly what you're consuming on the other side. Another big piece of security. And then the third one I would say is OCSF, the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework. This is a Linux Foundation project for security data portability. Idea being, I've already got all this rich data on assets, on vulnerabilities, on tickets, on other things. Why can't I pull that through my automation ecosystem and have self-updating paperwork? So big advocate of open standards. The KSIs themselves that I mentioned before are going to be made available in machine readable formats. There's a bunch of pilots and prototyping going on in the private sector, doing show and tell in the working groups with the FedRAMP office itself. And so that'll be another foundational element. But getting that compliance as code is a big piece. The automation ecosystem is driven by the API economy. Almost everything today has a robust set of APIs, which means we can interchange data. And if we can interchange data off these open standards, then you ought to have sort of this modern mesh architecture that can help you generate self-updating paperwork. And I think that's a big part of it. You need to be able to review the paperwork, to audit it, to know the posture you're in. I think that's an important assurance function that's not going anywhere. But I think what is going away is paying expensive consultants high hourly rates to generate all this stuff by hand, spending months and months and months around a conference room. I think you can automate a lot of it. And to that end, that gets to my third leg, which is AI. We built a fleet of AI agents that do things in an hour or less that would take months to do with consultants around that table, generating audit reports faster than you can go to the Keurig and back. That would have taken 6 to 8 weeks to do with a human, and you might wait months to get availability for that human. So it's all about sort of how do you speed it up with automation. And so the thing I always tell people is I spent 20 years in my career where there was no hope. There was no way to do this, but to throw elbow grease at it, to throw people at it, to create paper. Technology has evolved to the point with AI, with these standards, with APIs, that now you can start to automate. While you may not be able to automate everything, I think you can automate a ton of things that make a meaningful dent in both the speed of getting the certs as well as sort of the ROI calculation. If I can get my FedRAMP in a third of the time at a third of the cost and get access to the world's biggest market, what does that do for my business? So I think that's the exciting part of what's happening in the industry right now.
Great explanation. So let's discuss some challenges and opportunities because while this FedRAMP 20X offers significant advantages, what are some of the potential challenges and consideration that CSPs and the federal agencies might encounter during the transitions? And what opportunities does it create for innovation within the cloud security space?
Yeah, I fall back on two typically that I think are still large unsolved problems in the FedRAMP ecosystem. The first is this idea of a centrally funded PMO where I need to go get a federal sponsor for my package. That is burdensome in a lot of ways for a cloud service provider. One is you've got to find a government sponsor that's willing to shepherd you through the process, which means they've got to go do a lot of work on their side. And then the third problem is if you look at Doge and what's happened with the federal workforce, there's just a lot less of them now. And so now you're pushing this down to a group of people. There's less people. They've got to do a lot of extra work. It's hard for CSPs to get their foot in the door. What I'd really like to see is a fee for service model. If I want to go get a SOC 2 or another cert, I pay somebody a fee that covers the cost of processing my package. I'd really like to see GSA stand up a fee for service model where if I'm a CSP and it's going to take 6 weeks of an AO's time to do this work, that I just fund that 6 weeks fee for service. And whatever the demand is how many they end up hiring. The upsides of that is as a CSP, I don't have to worry about finding someone to do extra work on that side. I just pay for the work to be done. So I can get my foot in the door. The second is as a taxpayer, we don't have to fund it. So it's one where the private sector can fund their own access to the market. If you want to be in the market, you can pay the fee for service to get in. If you don't, then that's a choice you make on your side. So I think that streamlines a bunch of stuff. So from a fiscally conservative taxpayer, I'd love to see them get out of the business of funding this. And as a CSP, I would love to see essentially removing this barrier to entry into the market and making it easier for more companies to get access. So I'd say that's a big first one. The second challenge I see, and FedRamp took a big step to their credit, and when the law passed, there's now a presumption of adequacy. I'd rather just say it approved. So from a CSP perspective, the goal of FedRamp is I get an authorization that should be government wide. I don't have to go do a bunch of rework in each agency to do these one-off things, but there's still a fair amount of rework that happens. If you think about how many Office 365 packages probably exist across government where we've paid $250K to $1 million to develop roughly the same package thousands of times, this makes no sense from a taxpayer or a CSP perspective. So I'd love to see just adequacy where we have government-wide risk envelopes and it's just approved. And so the agency has to accept it because let's say the CISO council has approved this envelope, FedRamp approved you within it. Now the CSPs get certainty that if I spend this money and go through this highly rigorous security process, and it is highly rigorous, it's the gold standard for the world for a reason, that I should get certainty that I can operate in all those markets. And so that I think is another big piece that I would push for from the industry side. I think industry would like less rework. And I think the taxpayers would like to quit funding rework across all the different agencies.
So, Travis, I would like to ask you a personal point of view. What are the major misconceptions in this field that you see and you kind of strongly disagree with?
I'd say the big one that I always hear that I don't like is people will say we need to throw out all this compliance stuff and FISMA and ATOs. And they'll say something like compliance doesn't equal security and sort of chest pound and that sort of thing. And it's both true and false. What I would say is it's true that I can be completely compliant and still get owned. Right. So like compliance does not always equal security. But at the same time, what I tell people is if you look at it instead of compliance is I have to check all these boxes and I must do it. And instead, if you look at all the controls as best practice and say like it's generally a best practice to do all these things, but it's situational, right? There's certain circumstances where things make no sense with modern technology because that best practice was great in a client service server world 20 years ago, but may not be appropriate for a zero trust architecture that's cloud native, right? So I think if you look at that talk track, I think undermines security in a lot of ways. I think if you look at what NIST was actually trying to do with the risk management framework, that's kind of how they worded it. These are all the best practices. here's the guidance on what you should do, and you should tailor it based off your risk thresholds and other things, right? What's largely happened in the government, because it's more bureaucratic and more auditor focused, is they sort of audited in as requirements. So what was guidance becomes a Moses tablet of requirements, and you must do them all. I think we don't do ourselves any favors with either the talk track we use or the mindset we have on how we do it. I think publishing this is the best practice, tailor it, justify it with risk, get to the other side is, I think, a time-tested way to do it. It just falls down in implementation and talk track a lot of times.
Awesome. So if we summarize our interview for someone who is listening to this and would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would it be?
Yeah, if you're on the CSP side, I'd say there's never been a better time to think about getting FedRamp if you want access to the federal market. And I'd say start to rethink your assumptions about how much time and effort it's going to take. I think they're doing a lot of good work to try to lower the barrier to entry from a process perspective. At the same time, as a CSP, I would say there's never been a better time to rethink your security architecture and be secure by design. If you can push good security, the future of FedRAMP is going to be built more on those assumptions and principles. So I think those would be sort of my two advices for the CSP side. For the folks who may be running, thinking about changes to the law, to FISMA, to FedRAMP, I would really like to see sort of the government-wide approvals for a cost savings perspective, as well as a fee-for-service model at GSA, where we can just fund a set of federal AOs that are funded fee for service, who do this work on behalf of the taxpayer and quickly get CSPs through the process. I think there are a lot of wins that can be made there that are good for all parties involved. So that would be my big push for the people in the FedRAMP PMO who might be listening, or on the lawmaker side.
All right, that's fantastic. Thank you. And that's were all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot to ask you something that is important for you to tell to our audience, please go ahead.
I think, as always, Boris, you're very thorough. I think we covered the talk track here. I think I just close by saying, if you're still doing things in a very manual and reactive mode in risk and compliance, there are opportunities using compliance as code and automation and AI to radically change both the speed at which you can get reps and certs and the cost basis of what it takes you to get those reps and certs. And so if you aren't thinking about it, explore options in the market that exist. There's a lot you can do to transform your security and risk program, whether you're thinking about FedRAMP or any global compliance framework.
Right, fantastic. Thank you again for this great interview. And I wish you and your company Regscale a great success in this market, which is kind of producing security to our cyber future. And I hope to interview one of you guys again in the future.
Absolutely. It's been an honor to be here, Boris. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye-bye.